Well, I welcome you to our special select board meeting and call it to order at 7 o'clock. This evening, we have a presentation to the town on the Middlebury Bridge and Rail project and focused on especially what's going to happen over the next 10 weeks when we do the official shutdown effective on Monday. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just like to rehash and draw everybody's attention to the community goals that we set at the, we established these goals at the outset of our project. Number one was to protect the safety of all involved people, property, and the environment, minimizing the project's impact on the vitality of our downtown community, which unfortunately, I think that the current environment has overshadowed everything that we've tried to do up to this point. Maintain traffic flow and pedestrian access to the maximum extent possible throughout the project. Develop and maintain a credible schedule, which we were right on until COVID shut us down and put us back a little bit. However, we were able to get going one of the early projects during the summer to get green lighted by the governor so that we could still get it done this year. And finally, to engage with the local community and facilitate clear communications with all stakeholders. And that's why we wanted to have this evening, is to make sure everybody has an opportunity is to see the plan, to ask questions, and make sure we're communicating with you. And I think that Jim Gish has been doing a wonderful job as well, providing the weekly and certainly this week it's daily updates on what's going on. Next slide, please. With us tonight is John Griffin, V-Trans project manager, Nate Speenberg and John Whitaker, the project managers for Cabricki, Aaron Guyette, the project engineer, and Matt Hogan is going to be handling the overview of the communications for tonight. And before we get into the presentation, Matt's going to just go through a couple of administrative comments on the process for asking questions. Matt?
Thank you, Brian. First thing, I do want to mention that this meeting is being recorded. Now, if you have questions you'd like to ask, feel free to submit them at any time. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A button. You can click on that and type in your questions and we'll receive them. And those will be addressed later on in the presentation. If for any reason you're unable to type into the Q&A tool, or you prefer to ask your questions live via voice, later on in the presentation we'll have a segment where you can use the raise hand button. We can allow you to unmute. That being said, we greatly prefer if you can use the Q&A tool. It makes it easier for us to manage and make sure we can answer your questions to the best of our abilities tonight. That should cover it. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I thank all of those that have joined us. I hope that it's worth your time tonight. Leading us off will be Aaron Guyette, the lead engineer for VHB. Aaron?
Thanks, Brian. Just wanted to start off with a quick reminder on the scope of the project. So here's an overview of the project in Middlebury. Centered in the screen is the Main Street and Emergence Row area. So this project is replacing the two bridges. Those bridges were demolished in 2017. Temporary bridges were put up in their place. And then over this next 10 weeks, the construction crews will be installing precast concrete tunnel in that area, and then retaining walls that extend out either side. The overall project length is just about 3,500 feet, a little over 3,500 feet. The tunnel length is about 360 feet, and that total construction area that you see outlined in yellow is about 6.1 acres. So very linear project along the railroad. and then in the center of town, spreads out a little bit on the Main Street Merchants Row area. Just kind of frame of reference here for what we're talking about with the tunnel and the retaining walls, which we're calling U-walls. On the left-hand side of the screen is a typical section of that tunnel. This is in the paved areas. The tunnel will also go underneath the area that's in between Triangle Park and the rest of the Village Green. That area will be grassed over and partially grassed over and partially hardscaped with some granite pavers, concrete sidewalks. So kind of a big change in the depth that you can see right now, about 18 feet clearance there, and we're going down to 21 feet. It's a closed box, precast concrete. And then either end of this is the U-walls, and these extend out beyond the tunnel, both to the north and to the south. They're there to, as we excavate down, they're there to retain the fill permanently on either side of it. And they'll extend on the northern side just about up to the depot, and then on the southern side, just past where the pump station is, if you're familiar with that southern side. So our current project status. I'm gonna turn this over to John Griffin, the project manager for V-Trans, to talk about the current project status and a little bit of what we've accomplished already.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Griffin. I am the project manager for V-Trans. So to date, as everybody's familiar, we've already completed early work package 1 in 2017, early work package 2 in 2018, and then this project has been ongoing from all of last year, 2019, through this construction season, and will continue on a little bit into next construction season as well. So we're in what we call the main project. So right now we're at the point of the closure period, which we'll get into a little bit. Aaron, can you take me to the next slide, please? So just a quick overview. The 2018 project accomplishments. We've got the temporary access road we needed to the back of the Patel building. New stormwater and drainage installed for downtown. That's basically to get it out of the way for this construction season. And undergrounding of all the electrical and telecommunications so that they wouldn't be in the way for the cranes or anything that went under the railroad tracks had to be lowered so that we could lower the railroad like Aaron showed in slide 2. So we're moving ahead. Next slide, please, Aaron. So 2019, the new sewer was installed. Stormwater lines were installed downtown. The ledge was pre-drilled and blasted underneath Main Street, everywhere except for the Main Street Bridge. That should help facilitate this year's construction schedule. It's still down there. We haven't really removed all of it yet. It was just blasted and left in place so that it could be removed this season. In addition to that, you'll hear us use the term supportive excavation, or SOE. If you hear somebody say SOE tonight, that's referring to the supportive excavation, which are the mini piles, the timber lagging, the temporary sheeting, and we've got some photos of that we can demonstrate what that is. So there's been extensive supportive excavation installed all of last construction season and to date in this construction season. So just an overview of the utility construction that's taken place to date. You can see highlighted in blue, green, and orange there, the water, storm, and the sewer work that was done. So there's extensive utility relocations that have already taken into place. So 2019, as you can see here in this photo, this was when the Merchants Row Bridge was still in place. At the bottom of the photo, you can see where the excavator is. There's some timber lagging, and then there's piles with tiebacks in those. That is what we're referring to as supportive excavation. And so we've been installing that. Kabriki's been installing that all of last season and all of this season to date in preparation for the next 10 weeks. On the northern end of the job, ECI has been installing what we call temporary sheeting. This is also a form of supportive excavation. On this end of the job, the ledge depths are greater, so we can use the temporary sheets. They have a toe embedment that allows us to leave these in, excavate down, that retains the fill on either side, and then at the end of the construction, we'll pull the sheets back out since they're temporary. So they will retain the fill on either side of the excavation while we're doing the 10-week closure.
Good evening. My name is Nathan Speenberg, Senior Construction Manager for Kabricki Construction. Myself and John Whitaker, the project manager for the project, are going to go through the activities we've done over the last few months to prepare for the 10-week shutdown. And then we're going to discuss in detail what you'll see during the 10-week shutdown. And then summarize what will go on after the shutdown and into next year. You go to next slide, Aaron, please. So the pre-closure activities, you'll see we have mobilized a lot of different equipment into the site. Primarily, what most have seen is the 3 cranes, 1 300-ton and 2 200-ton cranes at different locations across the job. Those that have come up Vermont 30 into Middlebury have seen that all the precast has been delivered, and we've set up a marshaling yard or a logistics area so that we can pre-stage materials closer to the job site to bring them in when we need them. We've also continued the excavation and the supportive excavation that John Griffin just recently explained. Next slide. As I just talked about, and as Aaron from VHB mentioned, the project location is primarily in the center of Middlebury, from the railroad trestle bridge out to around the old railroad depot, near the rail yard. There's not a lot of space in that area for us to store materials. So what we've highlighted down in Fifield Farm on either side of Vermont 30, the location where we're storing the majority of our materials to be brought in during the project and the 10-week shutdown. Next slide, please. Here's a shot that John Whitaker will go through.
So this here is our marshaling yard that both Nate and John and Aaron had spoke about. So this is out on Route 30 in Vermont, right next to the golf course. This here is where we are staging all of our precast. To date, all of the precast has been delivered. It is on site and located here, short of what's been brought over to Marble Works, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's all 422 pieces of precast that were brought up via truck from the precast yard out in Schuylerville, New York. So the next thing that occurred that I'm sure many of you have noticed now is the assembly of the cranes. So this photo here shows the setup of the crane mats. These crane mats are put in place to basically help spread the loads of the cranes and help create a safe picking location for those. You will see during the actual erection of the precast 5 cranes on site, 3 of which you see up in the air now. 1 now on Route 30, which is at our precast yard, and then we'll have an additional truck crane that'll be on site, set up on the east side of the cut of Merchants Row and Main Street, and also out on Seymour Street at one point. So this here is some photos of the cranes that were set up. The one on the left is our 300-ton crane. This is the largest crane that we have on site. That'll be picking the precast sections that create the tunnel that Aaron talked about in the beginning. That was performed having to shut down Main Street, which I'm sure many of you had come out to see, and has been sitting there since. So the one on the right is showing the 200-ton crane that's down behind Marble Works. And that one is, you'll see in the background, some of the precast actually pre-staged. So what we did was brought that precast out there and put that in place in preparation to be set into the tunnel cut to help eliminate some of the congestion in trucking when the actual shutdown occurs.
So the 2020 main roadway closure dates. I think this is why most people have probably attended, just to learn a little bit more about this. So as you know, Merchants Row has already been removed. It came out on May 28th, and that will be out until September 21st. Main Street is due to be taken out of service on Monday morning, July 13th, 7 a.m., and be out of service until September 21st. September 21st is the 10-week duration from July 13th. The Main Street footbridge will come out of service as well on July 13th on Monday. And it will not go back in because it'll be replaced by the tunnel, so there won't be a need for it. And then Printer's Alley will also be unavailable to pedestrians for that duration as well, starting on Monday. So the closure initiation. So Main Street will be closed at Bakery Lane and Mill Street, and then also at North Pleasant Street. Crosstown traffic will be detoured through Cross Street. So if you're going through and you used to go down Main Street, now you'll be using the Cross Street Bridge to get over the railroad. You'll no longer be able to go across Main Street. One thing I'd like to talk to you guys about a little bit is that we have partnered to provide the Shuttleberry, it's been named, which will be a continuous loop downtown for pedestrians, and that'll begin on Monday. Jim, if you wouldn't mind jumping on here to talk a little bit about some of the efforts Neighbors Together has done with wayfinding, I think that it would be most appropriate for the community to hear from you.
Sure, thanks, John. Hey, folks, Jim Gish, your community liaison here. We have a lot of road signs in Middlebury. There are 4 state highways that all converge on our town. Many of those road signs will be covered up and replaced with a new set of detour signs that the state and Kubricki have worked to put up to direct traffic around the detour. But Neighbors Together and the Better Middlebury Partnership, many of you will be familiar with how important these 2 groups have been to this project, got together and wanted to create something that was uniquely Middlebury with signage, and something that would help not just motorists gain around town, but also those on the sidewalks who needed to get between Marble Works and Main Street, from the post office to the National Bank, just getting around town. And so over here on the right, you can see Get Downtown Middlebury is the kind of brand that we came up with, emphasizing that downtown is open for business. Here you've got parking and walking, moving straight ahead here. So over the next few days, you'll see a number of these signs go up around town, both at the street level and at the sidewalk level, to help you kind of get oriented to our sidewalk detours, our street detours, and generally how to get from point A to point B downtown. So we're really excited about the V-Transit support for this part of the project, and looking forward to putting signs up. And I hope they help everyone kind of understand and navigate the detours that will be up in place starting Monday.
And that was a collective effort of what we kind of dubbed the Middlebury Mobility Committee. And so there was a lot of folks involved in helping put that together, but Neighbors Together and the Better Middlebury Partnership, right, Jim, if I named that correctly, had a very active role, and we really appreciate that.
And that was a little remiss, John, in not mentioning our Addison County Regional Planning Commission, which kind of chaired the meetings. And of course, V-Trans and VHP were involved, as well as FHI, the consultant on the public outreach part of the project.
And also Actor as well, being or Tri-Valley Transit as being a very, very helpful participant as well. So with that notice, we just wanted to let everybody know when the closure begins. It's 24/7, so 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Main Street, the temporary bridge and the footbridge are definitely going to be removed, like I said previously. And we would encourage you to use these signs to help you navigate this detour, to look at using the Shuttleberry. There'll be signs up for it. There's information available that we can share with folks. And hopefully you're able to navigate the construction closures aptly. And that's it for this slide, Aaron.
So thanks, John and Jim. Again, this is Nathan from Kubricki. John Whitaker and I are going to walk through a little more detail on what's going to happen during the 10-week closure. We've broken it down into 3 phases. Phase 1 roughly runs from about July 13th to July 23rd. The bottom line of that phase is to remove the old rail, to excavate down to the new elevation as Aaron Guy had described. We're going to be moving the excavation soils from either end of from Middlebury, either directly from roughly around the depot or out Water Street out to Fifield Farm. where we're going to store the majority of the materials or send them to Heffernan's pit if they aren't needed for reuse. We have to continue to do supportive excavation until we get to the ultimate depth of the tunnel to maintain a safe excavation for our workers. And then we do have some rock that needs to be removed that's in the way of the current design. That in the first 6 days of the phase 1, we'll conduct blasting operations like we did last fall during daylight hours only. One of the last things we need to do during this phase is to also connect the stormwater that will eventually run from Triangle Park to the stormwater and tunneled areas that we performed in 2018, so that eventually all the stormwater from that Triangle Park area can make it out to Otter Creek properly. And then those who have already noticed, we have installed LED lights on power poles rather than the large amount of quantity of light plant via gasoline engine power packs that would run all night 24/7. We've tried to eliminate as many of those as possible to minimize the noise impact by using a greener option with LED lights connected directly to the grid. Next slide.
So phase 2 is really built directly around the precast installation. You'll see right around this time that we will start hauling the pieces of precast into town, and you'll start to see the crane swinging. So the downtown tunnel, U-walls, north, south, all that stuff's going to be coming in different ways. We're going to have 6 flatbed trailers bringing these in. The majority of the pieces are going to come up Route 30, directly into downtown Middlebury, around the traffic circle, and then backed up Main Street to Triangle Park. There was a few people, I think, that came out and saw that mock-up, caught it just in time. But that's going to be the main route for a large majority of the precast. Basically everything in the middle for the tunnel area, as well as a large majority of the pieces heading south. There will be also a fairly decent amount of material going out across Cross Street Bridge and coming around Seymour Street and down into Marble Works in order to supply the other 200-ton crane. You saw that we staged some of the materials there, but that's only 31 of the multiple pieces that crane is going to set. And then finally wrapping up with a 275-ton crane out in the middle of Seymour Street. That'll be a very short duration, a couple days. You'll see some alternating traffic, single lane closures, and then at one point there will be a full closure of Seymour Street as far as through traffic goes. You'll still be able to get to Fire and Ice and the other businesses there, but you just will not be able to pass through. Good thing to mark out on that in regards to that trucking. So when we are bringing those tunnel pieces up and some of those other pieces, they have a large overhang on them. And because of that, all the parking on South Main Street between the Ralph Meyer Golf Course and the Academy Street are going to be temporarily suspended. And this is just going to help create a safer environment for oncoming traffic leading into where the trucks are heading into town. So the other thing to note is that the locations of the crane, right, you see that the one is right in the middle of Triangle Park. The other one you will not see too much impact from, as it's going to be down inside of the actual cut on the south end. The other 200-ton crane will be on the north end behind Marble Works along that route that it's been taking so far. And then the only other spot that we didn't talk about was just the 275-ton on the east side of the cut. So as far as phase 3 goes, after the precast has been set, we'll start coming behind it and backfilling even prior to this phase here. But the biggest thing here is just backfilling the tunnels and the U-walls. So the other side of Route 30, near our precast yard, you'll see some large piles of materials over there. That's where the majority of the material is going to come from, is directly from there with the dump trucks down into the cut, either via Water Street or via Marble Works. And that's how we're going to help to backfill the both ends. And then the rest of it's going to be brought in directly to Triangle Park and dumped in at that point there. So you'll see us start to bring that up. Once that backfill is complete, that allows us to begin doing the roadways, the sidewalks, some of the minor hardscaping, and then also rebuilding the rail corridor itself, as far as the rail and everything else down inside of it. The final thing that you may see a start of there will be the concrete cap walls. You'll see us pouring concrete above the precast on the north and south ends to create a nice final slope finish.
So upon the completion of the 10-week shutdown, you'll have both Main Street and Merchants Row back open to through traffic. Merchants Row will remain one way up the hill, as we still will have work to do to finish Triangle Park with landscaping, plantings, sidewalks, etc. Downtown parking on Main Street in front of Battelle Block will be restored. The Battelle Block access drive will be opened back up to through traffic rather than the access road that those tenants have been using recently. And then Printers Alley will be reopened back to pedestrians, but not yet to motorists. And that's due to the fact there's still some nice landscaping work that needs to be completed, as you'll see later in this presentation. To note also, Triangle Park will still be fenced off to also finish the nice landscaping that you'll see later on in this presentation.
So some community challenges, things that you guys should anticipate part of the project is traffic congestion at the cross street intersection with Core Square. Just without Main Street, we're adding a lot more capacity to that intersection. So if you're going to plan, if you're going to commute during peak hours, definitely anticipate congestion, be prepared for it. Another major challenge is going to be that there's no direct pedestrian access across the rail corridor. So in order to get across the rail corridor, you basically have to either go across the cross street bridge or down to Seymour and underneath the railroad overpass. So there's going to be limited access directly across the rail corridor. And then Main Street is going to be restricted basically to emergency service vehicles and deliveries to downtown businesses. That's going to be because of the fact that there's no space down there for due to the construction activities that are going on. So we're going to be limiting the amount of traffic down there. It would only be for essential services and emergency services. And then just anticipate, 24-hour, 7 days per week construction, lights, noise, dust, everything that you've experienced to date with construction, but around the clock. And one thing maybe just to be aware of is that we are anticipating, or not anticipating, but we are taking measures to mitigate nighttime noise. Nathan spoke about one of those mitigation efforts, which was the light plants using the LED lights. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't anticipate noise, especially with the background noise levels being quieter at night. The noise level might be the same as it is during the day, but it might seem louder. And Jim, do you have anything you'd like to add about community challenges or things that you think people should anticipate before you segue into your next slides?
Sure. Thanks, John. I'll just note that this week I've been talking at length in my construction update or my community update about how pedestrians, motorists, bicyclists are going to get around town. And I would encourage everyone, if you're not already a subscriber, to turn to www.middleburybridges.org. I have a regular update there, and you'll see how we're addressing many of the challenges. It's also an opportunity for you to bring to my attention and then to the project team's attention the things you're concerned about, how we can make things better as we move through this 10-week period here. So we can move to the next slide. So I want to talk just a bit about downtown parking because we've put a lot of work into creating parking downtown that's safe and accessible to downtown. So let's start with the post office. In my observation, that's been the high volume go-to downtown, the post office. And so we've worked with V-Trans and Kabricki to create 11 parking spaces that will sit between the crosswalk. There's the large crosswalk that goes from the town green over to the post office. So if you think of that crosswalk going north to Seymour Street, there will be 11 spaces there, including 2 handicap spaces. You'll be able to turn into this area from Seymour Street, whether you're either a right-hand turn or a left-hand turn. One change we are making here is we're signing it for a 15-minute limit, where we're asking people to turn over those spaces quickly so that people who need to get into the post office check their box. mail material, whatever their business is, to get in and have an opportunity to take care of business there. So that's those spaces in front of the post office. I think the main go-to downtown for parking will be the upper and lower municipal lots. Those are the ones directly behind the town offices and Ilsley Library. And so we have restricted those to a 2-hour time limit. So that's both the upper lot directly behind Ilsley and then the lower lot, which currently is all day. And so I would encourage you as you come into town that that's your first spot to go to look for parking. Directly behind Ilsley, there are 12 parking spaces. And there we're going to sign those with a sign that reads, recommended for seniors and families with small children. Those of you who are shoppers at the co-op will recognize that there are several spaces right out in front of the co-op that are signed that way. And we will encourage folks to leave those spaces for seniors and families with small children who want to get into town. That's the municipal lot. As all of us locals know, there's also the Mill Street lot, which is down alongside Otter Creek next to Stone Mill, and the Academy Street lot, which is at the far end of the park, right in front of Schaefer's. Those are two lots that are very accessible to downtown. I also wanted to mention Franklin Street. Nathan and John mentioned why we have to eliminate the parking on South Main Street for that period when the precast is being brought into town. And so Franklin Street, which is a relatively short road that goes from Academy Street north up toward the college library, that's a two-way street today. That'll go one way temporarily. And so we can put in parallel parking alongside the park to help offset the loss of parking on South Main Street. So those are a handful of parking lots where you could park and get into town with a relatively short walk. And of course, there's a lot of street parking available too. On one side of town, we've got, as you can see here in this slide, there's Weybridge Street, there's South Street, there's College Street. All of us locals will be familiar with those. And over on the north side of town, South Pleasant Street, North Pleasant Street, Seymour Street, there's a lot of on-street parking too that will be available to you. So I think we're feeling confident that while Merchants Row and Main Street parking for the most part will be taken out of service during this 10-week period, that we've provided enough parking to encourage you to come downtown, take care of business, and while you're here, see a once-in-a-lifetime construction project underway. So while we're talking about getting around downtown, this is the detour route shown in a visual here that we were talking about earlier, showing Cross Street Bridge. Whether you're going north or south, the way to get around downtown with Main Street closed will be Cross Street over to Court Street, up through Court Square, and north on North Pleasant Street, or vice versa. Those of us who live here locally know that Pulp Mill Bridge is also one way to get across town. And there I would just caution you, if you're not used to going through the Pulp Mill Bridge, it's very narrow lanes. I would ask you to go slowly as you go through there, and remember what an important structure this is to Middlebury and Weybridge, and we want to keep it in good shape as we move through this period. And again, we talked about pedestrian mobility here. Those of you who are looking to get in shape will have an opportunity to do so here by walking our detours here and watching the construction while you're doing so. And as John mentioned earlier, if the day's hot or you're in a hurry or you're just not up for the walk, the Shuttleberry will be continuously looping around downtown every 15 minutes. And I think it's a great opportunity to jump on the service that V-Trans is providing. So let's say you're in front of the post office, you can pick it up right there and ride it back into the Marble Works if you park there. I would encourage you to get to know that service and take advantage of it during these 10 weeks. What you're looking at here is the Get Downtown mobility map. This came out of the mobility committee that John mentioned before. A number of us worked on creating this map, which it may be a little hard to see here, but what you're looking at is is a map that shows the Shuttleberry route, what our walking routes will be, where roads are closed, where they're open, basically how to get around town. That'll be great for us who live locally who have to get familiar with this. It'll also be really important as visitors start to coming back into Vermont and into Middlebury, and so they'll know their way around. These maps will be posted in large size at various locations around town. I think we have 9 total locations. You've chosen strategically, so whatever part of town you're in, there'll be a large size version of this map. We also printed 5,000 copies to hand out to local stores, the post office, the inns and hotels in town. We're going to blanket the area with these, as well as make them available to you digitally if you want to print them out yourself. So this is how we're going to get around downtown during this period. A very useful piece of work here. And then over on the right here, we have experiencemiddlebury.com. This is the website that has been created and maintained by the Better Middlebury Partnership. And this is an important part of the project. Many of our stores and restaurants are still kind of struggling to get back on their feet. And the VTrans has provided the town of Middlebury with a good grant of money to promote downtown during this period. When we were going through the planning of the environment that we're in now isn't quite what we anticipated. But nevertheless, our restaurants and our downtown businesses need our support. I encourage you to go on experiencemiddlebury.com and become familiar with the many activities, events, prizes, and so forth that will be in place here as we move through these 10 weeks. As you can see here, you can also link directly to my construction updates from this site as well. Okay.
So as far as the post-closure activity goes, this is basically after the closure is complete, beginning in October through December. We're going to be down completing the construction of the rail corridor, basically wrapping up any additional touch-ups to the rail that need to be performed, general grading, finalizing the U-wall cast-in-place concrete caps that we talked about earlier. It's getting started hopefully towards the end of the shutdown. Once those are complete, there's a decorative railing that gets installed down both sides. There will be one area to the north that actually just gets a chain link fence, but the majority of the top of the cap walls actually get a nice decorative railing that gets installed. The fencing we just talked about, and then finally the Triangle Park and Lazarus Park. So those are going to be graded up with some input, some initial plantings in. All the plantings won't be completed this year, especially with the schedule getting pushed later in the year due to COVID. Just because we want an opportunity for those plants to catch and thrive and not die out due to the short period before winter hits. So,
As for the post-closure impacts, which would be the next slide, there will be some still intermittent short-term lane closures on Main Street Merchants Row. That's to facilitate deliveries and the installation of the final grading and or landscaping. And you'll see the pavers and the curb, as well as the reuse of some of the ashlar blocks that were moved from the foundation and the renderings that VHB will describe shortly. Triangle Park, as I said earlier, will be fenced off still so that we can actually install all that landscaping between the church and Main Street Merchants Row. And then there'll be intermittent sidewalk closures, primarily along the paralleling Triangle Park within our fence line. But there will be some occasion sidewalk detours so that we can finish up some of the landscaping within the roadways and some of the tree plantings within the sidewalk areas. Next slide, please. Finally, as we move into 2021, Kabricki's hopes is a lot of this will be final plantings based on the planting season of different plant species that have been selected for the landscaping. We have to plant some in the fall and some in the spring. There'll be a final course of paving, final striping, final array of traffic signage to its finished state, and then cleaning up, removing all of our equipment, and getting out of Middlebury so that it is back to the project that all have been anxiously awaiting to complete. 2021, it's Ricky's intent to minimize as much work as possible, trying to get as much done this fall as possible, weather dependent. Majority of that is so that we can leave you a nice finished landscaping product. We won't install pavers or plants that may be damaged through the winter, and we'll focus on that in the spring if a better result is because of it. Other things in 2021 is you may see us cleaning up different staging areas. If those of you know that we have a staging area out on Exchange Street that we will remove all of our materials and start to clean up some of the remnants of our equipment that's been there well since 2017 when the bridges were removed. And we'll also do a once walk over with V-Trans and make sure everything is good to call the project a success. Being that said, I'll hand it over to VHB to describe some of the renderings and the look of the project at completion.
And Aaron, before we jump into that, would we be able to just answer that one question that Brian typed it into? We had a participant, I think before we get too far away from it, ask, how do I access the Frog Hollow parking lot? And can I go down Main Street to get to Mill Street?
Sure. Why don't I take that, John? Thank you for that question. So Main Street will be closed on the other side of Bakery Lane and Mill Street. So you'll be able to get to Frog Hollow by coming up Main Street from the roundabout and turning left just as you normally would down to Frog Hollow. And you'll be able to exit out the other side onto Waybridge Street. There will be no impact on that roadway.
Great, thanks, Jim. So there's just a few slides here. These are some photorealistic renderings that were developed based upon the design. And this is the intent for how the project area looks after it's completed. Won't go into too much detail on these. These are all posted on the project website if you look at them in more detail. Just pointing out a couple things here. The tunnel is in place in this photo. Roadways are reopened. The area that is an open cut or has been an open cut for the last 100 years or so is covered over. And it's a park / green space on the top there. Just another photo rendering looking towards the bank building from Merchants Row. Point out the reuse of the ashlar blocks as seating in the park area. Those are the blocks that were previously lining the railroad. You can still see some of them on the Main Street side of things. The Merchants Row, most of those ashlar blocks have been removed at this point in time, and the intent is to reincorporate those into the project, a little historic element. Another shot of the park area looking from Main Street. This is the Printer's Alley area where there will be a small park as you walk down towards the Marble Works. And this is the bottom of that small park area with a labyrinth. Have an interesting element to include into there. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Britta Ton. Britta's a historic preservationist with VHB, and she's going to talk a little bit about a project that's part of this Middlebury Bridge and Rail project. We explained this to the select board at a regular select board meeting just a couple of weeks ago, and this really comes about as a part of the NEPA process and Section 106 historic review. Because we do have some impacts to historic resources in downtown, including the old bridges, which were considered historic. There is some mitigation that's required. Part of that mitigation is to update the nomination for the Middlebury Village Historic District with the National Register of Historic Places. So with that, I'll turn it over to Britta, and then Devin Coleman as well will be speaking. Devin's with the State Historic Preservation Office.
Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to talk about this as a two-phase project. So it's going to result in an update to the existing Middlebury Village Historic District. So this historic district was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1976, and again, updated in 1980 with an expanded boundary. So the existing historic district, as you can understand from these dates, is somewhat outdated. So the map you can see on the screen on the right is what this 1976 boundary looks like. And I will show another map in just a little bit that shows what the existing district looks like with the 1980 expansion. So the new version of this historic district nomination will have much more detail, and it's going to be a better tool for understanding the history and significance of Middlebury Village. Let's go to the next slide, please. So from an architectural perspective, Middlebury Village remains amazingly intact, and many of the buildings have not actually changed very much since 1976, 1980. In fact, as you may have seen historic photos before, like this one from the 70s, almost historic, many of the buildings have not changed at all since they were built, some of which were built over 200 years ago. So with that said, in general, some of the early nomination documentation, such as that for Middlebury Village, is lacking detail. So our standards for documenting buildings and structures and completing such National Register nominations have changed quite a bit. And as you can see from this slide, like I just mentioned, some of the photographs are a bit outdated. So part of this effort will involve re-photographing and redocumenting through photography the downtown and Middlebury Village. So next slide, please. And so as I mentioned, this is a project that will be completed in 2 phases. So phase 1 of the project we are just beginning right now is a survey of the village to record information about the history and architecture of each historic resource within the district and in neighborhoods that are surrounding the existing district. So this survey is being completed according to the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation Guidance for Historic District Nominations. And the purpose of this survey is really to inform the National Register nomination by recording relevant information about the history and architecture of buildings. We'll also be documenting structures such as Battelle Bridge and sites such as the Green and other areas downtown. So you will see me, or you may see me and my colleague Caitlin O'Shea in the field. We are going to have tablets, and we're going to be collecting information about each historic resource, and these will be documented on a survey form. And so information to be collected includes a building's date of construction, its style, its materials, and all of this work, I should note, that we will be doing in the field to collect the information will be completed from the public right away. So we're not going to be walking on anyone's private property unless we have specific permission from a property owner to do so. So the photograph on the right just shows a few key players involved in this effort, myself on the left, Caitlin O'Shea on the right. So we will be the two working a lot downtown. Devin Coleman's in the red jacket with the Division for Historic Preservation. Judith Ehrlich, VTrans Historic Preservation Officer, looking on from behind. So next slide, please. So VHB is going to use this survey that we're completing to determine if the district boundary that exists right now needs to be expanded to include neighborhoods that are architecturally and historically significant components of the district that are not currently in the historic district. So the purpose of this potential expansion is to basically have a more complete nomination. So we recognize that the existing boundary does not include some important neighborhoods in the village, such as South Street, North Pleasant Street, and High Street, just some examples. So we're going to be surveying these neighborhoods, documenting their buildings to confirm whether or not they should be included within the updated historic district. So this map here on the right shows the 1976 district boundary in orange, just maybe a little hard to see, and then in yellow, the 1980 district as it looks today. And there are also color-coded zones. This is just to really help inform our survey effort and to organize the survey. There are over 400 buildings that we're going to be looking at, so we're finding a way to break that down. And then you can see areas maybe that are crosshatched. Those are areas outside of the existing historic district that we identified as potential neighborhoods to incorporate into the district. So those are neighborhoods that we're going to survey as well, many of which are already located on the State Register of Historic Places. So it's important to note that through this effort, we are not going to be listing any new resources on the State Register of Historic Places. So this survey is simply used to inform the National Register nomination. So phase 2 of this project is the actual completion of the National Register nomination. And it's going to incorporate information from the survey to inform a narrative that focuses on the history, architecture, and significance of Middlebury Village. So I'm going to hand it over now to Devin Coleman, who is the state architectural historian for the Vermont Division with Historic Preservation. And he's going to speak a bit more about the National Register and hopefully address some frequently asked questions. So Devin.
Thank you, Britta. Thanks to everyone for joining us. This is a great opportunity to update this nomination, which is long overdue. As Britta noted, it was originally completed in the 1970s, and things have changed in Middlebury since then. Buildings have been built, buildings have been removed, some buildings have been physically relocated, so this is really a great project. In terms of what the National Register of Historic Places is, it is a program run by the National Park Service, and it's the official list of the nation's historic places that are worthy of preservation. So it's part of having a consistent process for researching and documenting our nation's heritage, and that information can then help inform efforts to preserve and protect those resources. And the program is administered by the National Park Service through the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation at the state level. And then we coordinate the process with local property owners and community members, as is the case here in Middlebury for this project. Next slide, please. Since the first National Register listings in Vermont in 1966, we've listed more than 12,000 buildings, sites, structures, objects, and districts in Vermont. So this is a program that is in place throughout the entire state, communities large and small. And to qualify for listing, a property has to be both historically significant and retain sufficient integrity to convey its significance. And to make this assessment, and this is what Caitlin and Britta will be working on, they will be using national standards and criteria that are well-defined and very familiar to practitioners in our field to evaluate each property and determine whether or not it contributes to the historic significance of the Middlebury Historic District or does not contribute. And I always like to point out that a property does not have to be big and fancy or the home of someone famous in order to be eligible for the National Register. Oftentimes amongst the general public, there's a thought that only the big mansions or the home of a former governor or someone really famous is eligible. But we've listed in the National Register things like factories, industrial sites, bridges, worker housing. These are also historic places that help tell the story of Vermont's history and who lived here, who worked here, and what occurred in our past. So if you're wondering why Britta and Caitlin might be, looking at your property or a building that doesn't necessarily scream, architectural landmark or historic landmark, it's because we are taking a broad view and really looking at the whole history of Middlebury and documenting it for future reference. And I'll turn it back over to Britta.
Thank you so much, Devin. So hopefully that gives everyone a good background for understanding this project and why you'll see us out in the field and what you can expect the end product will be for this mitigation component. So I'm going to turn it back over to the next speaker.
Yep, so this is just a quick reminder about the project website. This is a website that's hosted by VTrans. The address is at the top of the screen, and you can go here for project updates. If you'd like to look back at any past project documents, those are all there as well, and past presentations that have been given to the public and to the select board. So if you'd like to check that out, that's there. And then just a thank you message from our entire team. A thank you to the Middlebury community. It's a unique place to work, a special place to work, and I think our whole team has really enjoyed working on this project. Every project that I work on in Middlebury is great, and really enjoy the community and the folks that are there. John or Nathan.
I would like to echo that statement. It's been a very positive experience. The community's been fantastic. It's been a pleasure to get to kind of learn your town. I'm not from this side of the state. I live over in Waterbury, so I commute over every day, and it's been a lot of fun to get to visit some of the businesses, meet some of the people, and learn the area. And it's been a great experience. So I'd like to also echo that statement of thank you, and very, very much appreciate the welcome.
And same from us, right? We ever since we came in here back in 2017, it's been pretty much open arms from a lot of the business owners, a lot of the people. It's great to see, local daycares bringing the kids out, getting to see the big equipment. We love getting the support from them and opening construction up to their eyes, because we definitely need some help in the industry. We're always open to taking on more people. So love to see it, and definitely have enjoyed all the great food down here. So we'll miss that, that's for sure.
I just wanted to share one brief anecdote. Many of you have heard me talk about main drilling and blasting in my updates. And last summer, a young crew arrived from main drilling and blasting, and they came to our block party. And after a couple of hours of having fun with the locals, I asked them what they thought of Middlebury, and they said, "We love this town. Usually people, when the sites we work on, people are yelling at us and throwing things at us. So, but we love Middlebury." And I think that, as John and Nathan said, from a contractor point of view, I think that all the workers you see every day downtown working to make to improve our town feel the same way about Middlebury. And I appreciate the way our community has embraced this project. It's been a hardship, but I appreciate the way that the community at large has embraced this project and seen the value in it and understood the value that the workers are bringing to this community too.
We are getting some questions. There's first two questions. If you open the Q&A, would be appropriate for the project team. The questions about the concrete placement sequencing and how they're going to be placed.
John or Nathan, can one of you take that first?
Yeah. So the sequence of the concrete being placed. So basically, we're going to start right, more or less, we'll call it the center. It's not exactly center, but the first piece of precast to be set is going to be right next to the manholes that you'll see that are getting set in place down inside of the cut, which is really right north of what used to be the Merchants Row Bridge. We start there and then start heading to the south. The reason for that is that one in particular piece actually takes on some piping that comes from underneath it to basically take on all the underdrain, which collects all the water that may get trapped inside of that tunnel during rainstorms. So basically, we're starting there in the center, working south until we get to the end, and then we're coming back and getting right back on that point and headed north, and then putting the tunnel tops on as well while we continue setting precast out into the Marble Works area. I saw the second question there basically asks the upper precast segments offset from the lower segments and if they're being placed as a running bond. They're not. The upper pieces are actually the same size and in line with the pieces below them. The reason for that is they actually have some post-tensioned, I want to say it's inch and a quarter, very, very large size threaded rod basically that gets put into those to help hold those pieces in place along with an epoxy. So those pieces themselves are in line in order to make sure that we can get that post-tensioned connection there. But all the pieces are connected together utilizing a threaded rod and bolt basically type set that is cast into the pieces and the edge of each piece, so that way they can bolt them together and basically suck those pieces together to create the bond that we need with the pieces between them.
Thank you, John.
And-
Next one, Jim, about the bike racks.
Sure. I can take that one, Brian. So the question is, I'm wondering about the status of bike racks the town planned to purchase and place around downtown. So that's actually V-Trans funded the purchase of bike racks to be placed at various locations around town to encourage people to bike during the project and after the project as well. Those bike racks have been purchased and ordered, and they're currently with the Department of Public Works. DPW will be installing them shortly, and you'll see them go up on the town green and other locations around town. And Brian, I think I can take the next question too. Yep. The question is, will there be any restrictions on traffic turning from or onto South Pleasant Street from Cross Street? The Select Board earlier this year decided to temporarily eliminate a left-hand turn from South Pleasant Street onto Cross Street. The idea being that traffic can often back up if somebody's turning left onto Cross Street and Cross Street's really crowded. Again, we're talking about from South Pleasant Street. So there will be a sign that goes up that eliminates left-hand turns, and that will be live shortly. Otherwise, no other restrictions on the intersection at South Pleasant and Cross Street.
There's one more. It's a little different twist on the first one you answered, Jim, about the access to the Mill Street parking lot.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Is there any vehicular access to Mill Street, Park Street, and the Mill Street parking lot? Well, that's 3 yeses. There's really no impact on Mill Street. So again, if you're coming north on Main Street from the roundabout and you're going to take a left-hand turn down Mill Street, no problem at all. I think we all know that Mill Street's a one-way headed downhill and then up the other side of the hill to Weybridge Street. So that's open. You can also take that jog left to Park Street and park along Cannon Park. That's open there too. And the Mill Street parking lot, that's an absolute yes, because we want to set that aside. We want people parking there to get into downtown.
Jim, there's one more if you skip over about the parking officer. And I know we are looking for them to encourage people to abide by the
Sure.
new parking times.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So this question is, will there be a parking officer on duty to check parking time in the various parking areas? The answer is yes. I think many of you got to know last year Jody Covey, who's works with the Middlebury Police Department and was a friendly face on the street. And so the 15-minute time limit that I mentioned in front of the post office and the 2-hour time limit in the municipal lot will be enforced. I would say it will be enforced in a friendly way. Our idea is to encourage people coming downtown, not to turn them away. But if you've parked 4 hours in a 15-minute time limit, you may receive a ticket. This is just a way to keep things moving downtown and keep turning over the parking spaces.
Thank you, Jim. John, there's a couple there that either you or Nate can take.
I can take that first one there, Whitaker, the ashlar blocks. So yes, the ashlar blocks on the east side will remain in place and be buried. We're only going to be removing the ashlar blocks on the west side because the alignment of the tunnel is actually shifting in that direction. So if you've been downtown anytime recently over to the Battelle block side within the area fenced off, you can still see those ashlar blocks on the east side in place, and they will remain in place. As far as the trash and receptacles, I'm not sure what that question is specifically referring to. If that's existing municipal trash or existing municipal recycling receptacles that are out on the greens. I'm not sure about the status of those, Jim, but we would not be doing anything with those relative to the project, as far as my understanding.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. Yeah, I'm trying to, kind of locate in my mind where all the various recycling and trash receptacles are that are town-owned. I believe that those will all remain in place, whether on the town green in front of the post office, down further down Main Street, all in place. So I would say the answer to that is that those that are currently there will remain in place. If trash or recycling becomes an issue, I'm sure we'll deal with it.
Now, last question about drainage from the tunnel having a filtering component. I guess I could interpret that as maybe two different questions with two different answers. As far as the dewatering during construction, Nathan, if you could just give a quick overview of that, and then the final condition. Aaron, after Nathan, if you could give a quick overview of the final condition.
Yeah, so during construction activities, any water that we encounter will be pumped out of our excavation into a filtration system to clean any of the suspended solids or sediment out of it before it's discharged to Otter Creek. And that's in accordance with the stringent discharge permit that the project has to follow on a daily basis. As for after the tunnel is built and the water that may accumulate from normal rain situation, I'll hand over to Aaron Guyette.
Yep, thanks, Nathan. So the drainage scheme for after construction, there's been a lot of work on drainage, a whole year of construction in 2018 in preparation for the drainage. And so there's going to be the new tunnel and the U-walls, which will drain into the new system. And then there's the Main Street Merchants Row that's east of the tunnel, and the town village green area there as well. So all of that area also enters into the drainage system. The drainage that comes from the Main Street area and the village green will pass through a vortex separator to separate out solids from the kind of the water piece of it. So there will be some filtering there. As far as the drainage that goes through the tunnel, that will pass through several manhole structures with deep sumps on them, and so there will be time in there for sediment and contaminants to filter out into the sump of those manholes, catch basins, before it enters Otter Creek. So it's kind of a partial filtering, partial settlement in the sumps of the structures. Overall, it's a big improvement from what the system is today.
Thank you, Aaron. The next, Britta, if you could answer Joe's question about the town's master plan and impact that the National Registry might have on that.
Sure. So the National Register listing does not actually place any restrictions on a property itself. It's purely an honorific designation, and in it of itself, the program does not restrict a property. The only time when there might be a review when something is National Register listed is if there is some sort of government funded or permitted project, federal project, that then would have to account for any historic properties such as National Register listed properties, making sure there's no impacts to those properties. And I'm not sure, Devin, if you want to add anything else to that.
Sure. It's important to remember that Middlebury Village is already listed in the National Register. So this is an update that's doing new documentation, but the village has been listed in the National Register for 45 years. And certainly a lot has been done with the roundabout, the new town offices, the Cross Street Bridge. So I would think of the National Register update more as an informative planning tool that can ensure that good decisions are made about the treatment of historic resources in Middlebury Village. It does not mean that the village has suddenly become some sort of museum piece. We realize that it's an active, thriving community, and it needs to grow and evolve. And the National Register just helps inform that planning process.
Thank you. We don't have any other questions, but if you have some, if you could at least maybe put it into the chat here. Are there anyone, if there's anyone who would like to raise their hand, I believe Matt could unmute you if you would like to ask your question and have, and are not familiar with typing the question in.
Yep, that's right, Brian. Oh, we have a raised hand. Oh, it went back down. I'm not sure if that was accident. Okay, we have Kathleen Ramsey raised the hand. That went down also. Kathleen, if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand again, and we can let you speak. People might just be testing out the feature. One more time, just look at the bottom of the ribbon in your Zoom window and look for that raise hand button if you're unable to type or would prefer to ask your question live on the mic. Okay, and that was not a question, just a thank you. I appreciate the presentation. Well done. Thank you, Heather. Okay, Brian, I think that's it.
I guess if that's it, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you found it worth your while. I want to express my appreciation, the appreciation of the town for the presenters and for the work that you're doing to help the town of Middlebury be prepared for our next surge in growth. And so with that, I will at 8:11 call this select board meeting adjourned, and look forward to seeing everyone downtown observing this major project and hope everything goes smooth. Thank you very much.